Hey, what is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel on a very nice Monday morning. Hope you guys have had a good weekend. For those of you that are having a slow Monday, why don't we kick it off with episode 10 of our Firebase 3 real-time chat app video lesson. Now, our app is becoming super interesting because it's really coming together to form a nice chat application with a lot of its core functionalities in place. So why don't we go over what we did in the last episode, and then we'll talk about what we will do today. So in this simulator, we have logged in our Jon Snow user, and inside of the table view controller, we have a list of messages that are being populated from this messages node with these bits of information such as from ID, text, timestamp, and to ID. So this to ID is what is being printed on the top text label, and the to ID of NEB refers to this brand start character. So all of this information is being entered within chat log controller inside of the method called handle send, and we're just pumping in all this data into our messages node like so. So all of that is what we kind of worked on in the last episode of episode 9, and make sure to watch that in the link found in the description below and get kind of caught up before we start today. Anyhow, let's begin with what we want to build out for today's video tutorial. And taking a look at my completed application, we see that not only do we have the name for the user inside of the message, we also have the user's profile image view on the left side as well. So we're going to go ahead and implement the functionality that brings in those two components. And along the way, I'm going to show you some nice tips and tricks as to how to reuse your components that you've already written, and to also perform some really nice, cool tricks with code. So before I get started, I want to fix one problem that I've seen in the code, and essentially inside of login controllers handlers inside of registered user into database with UID, we have this hard-coded database URL that you guys don't have access to in terms of the Firebase console. So I'm going to just remove it and remove this from URL as well. So having done both of that, those two steps, we now reference whatever is inside of this Google service plist instead. So you guys will have a better way to access your database if you just use reference like that. So moving on to getting the name for our user like that. So this top row should really say brand Stark instead of this long to ID. So why don't we go ahead and go into messages controller, sell for row at index path, and inside of this bit of code right there, instead of setting the to ID, I will first unwrap it by saying if let to ID equals message.toID. And I'm gonna try to actually, let's see, not equal right there. I'm going to get the user right here, users, and then get this user via this reference right here. So let reference equals FIR database, see database reference, and child will be the message, or not messages, but users node. And then we'll specify a second child, which gets us to the to ID, getting us to this node right here. So having that reference set right there, I can observe a single event of type value, and I'll enter right there with a snapshot, and I'll print out this snapshot value like so. And I'm going to run the application, removing that commented line out. So I'm printing out this snapshot just to show you guys what is going on, and make sure you guys understand what the snapshot value is. So snapshot is being printed out down there. So it's just a printing of snapshot with email, name, and profile image URL. So to access this dictionary here, I will access snapshot.value like this. If let dictionary equals snapshot.value, cast it down as a string to any object dictionary like that. And here we will simply set cell.message, let's see, cell.text label dot text equals this dictionary's let's see, name object like so. And before this will compile, we need to cast it as a string from any object to string like that. If I run this application now, each one of these rows will actually print out the name of the message recipient instead. So Brand Stark, Melisandre, and so on and so forth. So that's how we would get the name. And now we want to actually get the image on the left of the name as well. So let's see, how do we want to do this? We don't really want to repeat any type of work. For example, I don't want to construct this cell so that I can add an image view in there again. So what I'm going to do is reuse this component inside of new message controller and reuse this entire cell right here. And this comes with this profile image view. So I'm just going to copy that out of new message controller. So below, if I drag this console down a little bit, we have this class called user cell. So I'm going to actually create a new group up here, and let's follow some MVC conventions by putting this entire user cell, which is really a view, inside of this file, which I'll create, called a user cell, just like that. And then this will import UI kit, followed by the pasting of the entire user cell in here. So let's remove those two spaces and build. So run. Everything is going to look exactly the same as before. But now my file is nicely tucked inside of, or the user cell is tucked inside of this file here. So moving on, let's now try to register this user cell inside of my messages controller, right above inside of view.load. So I'm going to type in view or table view, register class. So this is how you register user cell. Self gets the class. And what is this reuse identifier? Well, I'm going to create the cell ID up here. Let cell ID equals cell ID. Now I can actually remove this hack right here. So that's the hack, because we actually need to dequeue our cells from the table view instead. So it's table view dequeue with this cell ID guy and index path from this parameter right there. And if I run this application now, you'll notice that these cells are going to start looking a little differently inside of messages controller. In other words, we have some spacing on the left, which is actually the spacing on the left right there for the image view. Now, I noticed that the spacing is a little off here. What I mean is it's really tight. So I'm going to actually copy over this 72 height for the, for the table view and just paste it into my message controller table view and run the application. Now my height is going to be 72 instead of, I think it's 40 for the default height. So here we go. Looks a little better. And I think I can remove this snapshot print statement as well. This console is getting a little gnarly right now. Anyhow, I now want to fetch the image for the profile image view inside of this cell now. In other words, I can get it like this. So inside of this dictionary for this snapshot value, I have access to profile image URL, which is going to be unwrapped like this. Let profile image URL equals dictionary. And here we'll use the key of profile image URL, and we'll brace it off like that. And now we can access cell.profileImageView, or we should be able to do that, but we can't access this because this cell right here needs to be casted down to a user cell. And now I can access this profile image view inside of my user cell class right there. So let's go back to the previous file here, and we can call load image using cache of string profile image URL. So this needs to be casted down to a optional string. Here we go. So running this code now, our image will show up on the left side of the message right there. So that's how we would achieve this effect. All right, pretty good stuff. Hopefully nothing too confusing yet. And we're gonna move on from this to actually organize our code a little bit better. Now, you see all of this code right here, starting from this to that. This really doesn't belong inside of self or row at index path. It actually belongs inside of user cell. And the reason is because self or row, its main job is to just return a cell. Doing all this setup work to show the text and the image really should go inside of the view itself. So I'm going to perhaps show you guys how to clean up your code so that it's easier to manage. Now, because I have a message right here, I can actually create a property on user cell called message, and I'll create this property as optional. Inside of did set, see did capital SET, we will actually execute all of this code right here inside of the cell instead. I'm going to cut all of that. And then I will go into user cell and paste all that code in here. Okay, now I will need to resolve some of these errors by first importing Firebase. Gets that in there. Message will need an optional like that. And what else is wrong here? So we no longer need cell because text label is inside of the cell. So let's remove this as well. And I think this needs a self right there. And this also needs a self. Finally, remove this guy down here. And I believe this needs an optional. So this is the logic that is performed every time we set message. Going back to messages controller, all we need to do is set cell.message. Let me just build so we get this auto completion there, and set message from the line above. Also, I will remove this comment here that we don't need anymore. And running this now, we will get the exact same layout of our cell with the name and profile image view, just like that. Everything looks good. So now I can just simply work from within my cell instead of the very, very bloated controller file. Cool. So this is just a technique to organize your code a little better. Hopefully you guys kind of understand what's going on there. Now, the next bit of implementation that I want to show you guys is how you would actually group your cells together based on the user. And in a typical chat application, you only have one row per user, and that row shows the latest message for that message for that user. And the latest message is based usually on the timestamp, and it shows the last message sent. So this timestamp value is what we are going to use to kind of group these cells together so that they kind of look like this instead. Now, to make this easier to follow, I will first implement this time label on the right side and then show the timestamp for the message itself. So let's go to user cell, and I am going to create a time label right below profile image view right here. So let time label be of type UI label. So this is a closure block, which we will specify a label and return this label from this closure, and executing this closure with these two parentheses right there. So label, I'm going to set some dummy text, which will just say hour, minutes, and seconds, like that. So I am going to add it into the cells subview hierarchy by adding subview time label, like so. And to put it inside of this cell, we need to actually use some iOS 9 constraints. So before I can do that, let's set this property to false. And I will just add in these constraints right here. Okay, so what is the actual constraint we need first? Well, we need X, Y, and width anchors. So down here, I will first specify the right anchor to be pinned on the right side of the cell's right anchor by specifying time label dot right anchor constraint to the self dot right anchor of the entire cell. And time label's Y anchor will be center Y. So center Y anchor is pinned to the center of this text label like this. So text label dot center Y anchored. And then time label dot with anchor, so with anchor dot constrained, constrained to constant of perhaps a value of 100. And then finally, the height anchor will just be constrained to the text labels height anchor like that. Now let's just steal these active values, why don't we, and put it down here. So running this, I should be able to see a time label that has this bit of text on the right side of my my cell. So seeing as how this is kind of being printed out above right there, instead of using the center Y, I'm going to just pin the top anchor like this. So top anchor is pinned to, constrained to self.top anchor with a constant value of perhaps 20 pixels dot active equals true. So this is going to put the time label 20 pixels from the top of the entire cell. So here we go. That's what it looks like. And I feel like that's a little farther down than I would want it to be. So I'm just going to bring that down or bring that up by perhaps 2 pixels. So I'm going to run that. And I want to actually shrink this bit of text down a little bit by bringing the font to a UI font of, font system, font of size 12. And for clarity's sake, I will change the text color to a UI color of light gray color. I'm going to run this now, and you can see the obvious change inside of the time label there. Let's wait for this to start. And now it is this bit of text right here. Hopefully you guys can see that. Perhaps I'll use a dark, I think light gray color is fine. And let's just bump this up to 13 perhaps. So with all of that in place, I can actually bring in the actual timestamp down here. If I go to user cell message, I can quickly set the text label like this. Whenever we set this message, we can just simply say time label dot text equals message dot timestamp, right? The timestamp is an NS number, so we need the string value out of it via that method right there. Okay, so printing out the timestamp in there now, I think it's actually a little too light, so let's bring in dark gray color instead. Make it a little bit more visible. This timestamp is actually an integer representing the number of seconds from 1970. So that's how that works. And in order to print the date out properly, I first need to convert this timestamp to an actual date, and that's very easy. If we just set a timestamp, so timestamp date equals NS date, like this, and we'll use this constructor of time interval since 1970 of message dot timestamp, so timestamp dot double value, and that's what it needs to be. So none of this really compiles that well. So instead of unwrapping it like this and like this, let's do it a little safer by saying if let seconds equals message dot timestamp dot double value, like so. And we can actually set this right here. See, let me just paste that in there. It equals NS date, time interval since 1970, with this seconds value right there. So cool stuff. Let me just paste that in here as well. And let's see. I can actually use timestamp date dot description in here instead now. And with this value, we're actually just going to print out the raw string for the date, giving me this really long string right here. So typically a chat application just prints out the hour, minutes, and seconds, or basically the hour and seconds. But in this case, I will use a date formatter. So date formatter equals NS date formatter. And in here, we specify date formatter of format, date format equals this value right here. So HHMMS, and then perhaps I need two S's right there, a value of A. So So this is kind of cryptic, and you pretty much have to Google the date format strings for NSDate to figure out what this does. Anyhow, we can get the date formatter string from date timestamp date, and here we go. Let's see what the timestamp actually looks like whenever we use this date formatter instead. So now it says 11:26:45 with AM, and that is being printed basically based on this code inside of this date format string. So just Google that, and you'll find out what that means in a perhaps better explanation on Google. Cool. Now let's see how we should group these messages kind of together in a single row. So we actually want the last message for brand start to be this single message row. Essentially, we want this last message sent at 11:51 after all of these messages above. So how do we do that? What is the easiest way of constructing a data structure that allows us to group these messages together? Well, if we go to messages controller, all of these messages are being appended onto this messages array inside of line 40, right? So why don't I also include a messages dictionary, and we'll instantiate a string to message dictionary like this. And now we have this dictionary here. So what do I want to do with it is the question. And instead of just appending here, I'm going to set the value of self messages dictionary, and we'll use the value of 2ID inside of this. So we're just going to use message.toID like that equals message. Okay, so brand start's 2ID will just be the value of message, but we can't really do this yet because we need to safely unwrap the 2ID. So message.toID, and then we will just set this guy in here and use 2ID like that. So this might be a little confusing to some of you guys out there. So why don't we just put a breakpoint in here and see what this dictionary will contain every time we receive a message inside of this observation here. So we get this breakpoint here. Message dictionary is this right here. It has 0 values, and we hit 1, continue. And inside of here now, we get the first message, which is this brand start character, and then we keep hitting this continue button, and then we get more and more dictionary values. So as soon as we get a different recipient for the message, we get more values inside of our dictionary. And so our app still looks the same, but now we have this dictionary here that contains all of the messages, but only one per recipient or per user. And we'll use this to actually fill out our table view instead. So that is how you would kind of use a dictionary or a hash to fill out your table view. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that exactly. So every time we put a message inside of this dictionary, the value kind of changes. And if we if we comment out self messages, this entire table view will now show nothing because we now have messages.count of 0. The messages are no longer being appended into that array. And I'm going to say this instead: self messages equals self.messages dictionary dot values, right? So basically all the messages inside of the dictionary will be this array now, but we can't do this yet. And this is a Swift issue. We just have to cast it using this array right here. And doing that, we can actually reconstruct this array every time we put something inside of the dictionary. And having this done, we can load the table view now, whereas, let's see, in line 51, we load the entire table view with reload data. And inside of here, we get the actual message of the brand start character. And it just so happens that this message is the last message. It's not always the case that the last message is the right one. So we'll perhaps look at why that is. And first, I want to actually show you something else that is occurring here. So you notice how these messages are not being sorted properly. Basically, I want this igrid message to be the first one on top. So these two are correct, but this Tyrion message should appear above this Melisandre one because the time is 17 minutes after 11:33. So the way you would do that is to actually sort this entire array. And every time we reconstruct this messages array on line 46, we can sort it right below with sort in place, just like that. And we hit enter here. And here's how we sort two messages with M1 and M2. To be more explicit, let's call it message 1 and message 2. And we simply return the sort order of message 1 dot timestamp dot int value is greater than message 2 dot timestamp dot int value. So I know some of you guys have never seen this before probably, but this is how you would sort from an ascending order, or descending order rather. So we have the messages now in a descending time order. So this is the time that is greatest, and this is the time that is the least. And now our messages are being placed properly inside of our table. All right, that's gonna wrap it up for today. Hopefully you guys saw some of the useful tips and tricks to reorganizing your code so that it's easier to manage later down the road. Also, how to group your cells together so that only one message shows per user. Using a message dictionary or a hash is a very useful way of doing that. I know some of you guys might be a little confused on how that works, but walk through the debugger and look at how the message dictionary and the messages array is constructed as we observe everything inside of our messages inside of Firebase. Okay, and also make sure to like today's video if you enjoyed the content. Make sure to subscribe as well. It does really help me out and it helps the channel out as well. All right, in the next episode, let's figure out how we can put all of the users' messages inside the entire chat log controller. Really exciting stuff, so I hope you guys look forward to that. And furthermore, if you want to download the project for today's video lesson, you can click on the download link above. Follow me on Twitter at Build App. Finally, if you want to learn more about iOS development, click on the 3 playlist links on the bottom to get even better at iOS programming. That's about it, guys. Keep on coding, and I'll see you next time.